Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're with us watching our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show brought to you each and every week. Please make sure to join our YouTube channel, Join Mayshad, where you can stay up to date on all of our content and our programming. And check us out at joinmayshad.com, where you can learn more about how you too can become a part of how we revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. So today I have an incredibly accomplished woman who's joining us, who I've known for many, many, many years. And no better time to have a conversation about intergenerational working collaborations together than with Phyllis Haserot. Hi, Phyllis, welcome.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here with you, Jan, and the Mayshad audience. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Phyllis. So, Phyllis, I love the work you do. You're a cross-generational expert. You're an author, advisor, consultant, public speaker, and president of the Practice Development Council. Phyllis, talk to us a bit about why you do what you do. What do you find so fascinating about intergenerational workplace activities right now?
Oh, well, right now, and actually for 15 or 20 years that I've been focusing on this. I think everybody has some familiarity with intergenerational issues, whether they're personal ones or ones focused on work, as I do. And through my work as business development and marketing consultant and facilitator, speaker and writer and all of that for a few decades, I just realized that the younger people, this was in about 1997, were not getting the attention they needed from senior people because the senior people were too busy. And I started next generation programs in law and accounting firms that I was working with. And while it was focused at first on business development and marketing, people would bring all their baggage and all with them. And I just got more and more fascinated by all things generational at work. And so, decided to shift my focus, although business development and marketing is involved because part of it is externally attracting and retaining clients of different generations or other external stakeholders.
Phyllis, right now we have 4 generations in the workplace altogether?
Well, could be 5 in some places.
Could be 5.
Yeah, because there's still some traditionalists around, and Gen Z is beginning to enter. They've left college, some of them, the oldest ones, are out of college.
So I would imagine that can create some complexities in the sense of, people that are, baby boomers plus still in the workplace with Gen Zs. And not to mention, I do want to talk about Gen X because that's my generation, the lost generation, or the forgotten generation. We've got to talk about Gen X.
Oh,
But I know one of the things that you talk about often is mentoring across generations and how, the value that comes not just from a more senior person mentoring a more junior person, but the extreme benefit and reward that can come from a younger person who's in the workplace mentoring someone who's been, in the workplace for decades and decades. Let's talk about that, the nuance between that relationship.
Well, I actually believe in mentoring circles, and that involves really, it could be up, down, and sideways, and I think that that no one person can fulfill all the needs and advice that any other one person needs. So it's great to have a whole group of people. And so age in terms of mentoring really shouldn't matter that much. But it's really who knows more about something that you want to know, who has contacts for you, who can tell you, it's not necessarily technical knowledge. It could be anything. And so I think the more that we have intergenerational conversations at work, which is harder now, We'll talk about that a little bit. But the more we have of that, the better it's going to be. We all need to keep learning, and that's one of the best ways.
Phyllis, how has COVID at the same time prevented you or created challenges for you in the work that you do? And then in what way has COVID opened up new opportunities?
Okay, well, I guess it's easier to talk about what are the challenges right now. I'm a person who really loves being in person, and so much of what I have done, I've for a long time led forums online, which is even before the internet and or at least that's certainly before Zoom and Skype. But in person is just, I think there's so much more energy that's transferred, and you see much more of the full communication picture, much more nonverbal cues and all of that sort of thing. So transforming a lot of what I do to be online only, it has its challenges, not only learning some new technology or learning more about the Zoom that I've been using for several years, but never all the bells and whistles, and they keep adding, is a challenge. And also being able to get people cross-generationally to be all together and work in the way I do in the cross-generational conversation days is really hard. So that is, sort of, I don't want to say on hold, it's just has to be transformed. But I think the opportunities are what everybody has, in that you can reach people in all different places all at once. And if you keep up relationships with people that you are on Zoom meetings with, not just one shot kind of thing, you have a chance to build, more solid relationships that way.
Phyllis, in this moment in time, what advice do you have for baby boomer leaders?
I think, and it all depends if they're the older half of the baby boomers or the younger half, because I think that however the generations were defined, and I don't strictly at all hold to what the Census Bureau says in terms of birth years, and birth years is just one component of how you really define a generation. But I think that the ones who are thinking about or being forced out, we're talking about baby boomers, at this point, it's so much about knowledge transfer and not hoarding what you know and who you know, and reaching out to other people and making it easier for them to collaborate with you and have a really solid team, even though you're not sitting in the same room most of the time anymore. It'll be happening a little bit more. I think it's a matter of, if you are a founder or a senior person, to realize you need to start letting go and think about what you want your legacy at work to be. What do you want to be remembered for? Don't screw up what it is you built by insisting on and be open to role shifts. And those, you have to be creative about that. But I don't believe that anybody who is productive should not be able to work.
Phyllis, it's really interesting what you're saying, because when we think about, kind of how companies have evolved in the last, few years, maybe last 10 years, and, trade secrets used to be held very close to the vest, right? Meaning that companies were very hesitant to give away information or knowledge about anything that happened within a company for fear that the competition would come in and swoop it all away. But now, because we're so much more of a transparent, 24/7 real time, everyone has digital access to so much information, that there's been such a sea change in how companies really think about, what is their intellectual property, what are their trade secrets, what's their secret sauce. And I think overall much more open, and definitely exceptions to this in many different industries. But for the most part, there's much more, I guess, transparency in how companies talk about themselves and talk about their work and talk about their added value. And so as we think about exactly what you just said in the sense of your advice to baby boomers, then how does that impact then the next generation we'll talk about is Gen X? How does that impact Generation X as a work demographic, especially given the fact that Gen X is often forgotten about, in the sense of there's so much talk and so much emphasis on millennials, but yet Gen X, when you think about kind of the natural progression of to whom baby boomers will hand things down to, it is literally Gen X, right?
Well, by age and experience, they should be the next leaders if they're not already. And one of the things about them is, they've been in a sandwich between two very large generations who are more vocal and have different kind of outlook. And why is their outlook different? It's been that experience. So, what defines a generation is really the influences, economic, political, social, and cultural. And at a time when they were, really, more being influenced. So that's not when they're toddlers for the most part, but, like college age, high school, maybe. And if you look at historically what, the baby boomers tended to come into a much more optimistic time, better economy. It's been up and down since, but when they really started out, and the same thing with the millennials. And the Xers had a lot of bad things going on, and including personally, there was more divorce happening at that time. A lot of more women than before going to work. I hate the expression latchkey kids. I don't think everybody was a latchkey kid in Gen X, but there were a whole lot of things in a terrible economy. I mean, the worst before this one in 2008. So people were overqualified or couldn't get jobs, and they got resentful about it and were called slackers. And I believe that the slacker thing was not so much that they were slackers, but they couldn't do what they wanted to do, or they were overqualified for what they were given to do. And so then when the millennials came in, they were calling them slackers. It's interesting how this happens. I mean, it's so fascinating. That's why I love what I do. It just really is so interesting. So I think that Gen X needs to be more local. But if you think about it, they, besides this slacker thing, they became very hardworking, get it done, and say whatever, not letting things bother them too much. And as parents, they were more helicopter than the boomers, who weren't that much, at least not the older part, very overprotective of their kids. And so that consumed them in a lot of ways. They, had this, and have now, a pressure to be perfect, to do everything. And yet I think that in a way they aren't, and these are all such generalizations, but not necessarily thinking, what impact do I want to have down the line in my organization or in my community? They're working hard, but maybe not exactly with a plan and a way to implement it. So that's one of the things I'm really focusing on developing now with the series of masterminds, and not ready to be launched yet. Podcast with the same name, Legacy Makers at Work. So I'm really interested in that. But right now, the Gen X is getting it pretty hard, and yet they have developed a resilience from what they were facing before, which I hope will serve them well.
Phyllis, you also think is that there's a point of this where, so when you think about like loyalty to a company and career tenure time span with a company. And I also think that perhaps Gen Xers often saw their parents, very dedicated to a company for most of their career. And maybe they may have had maybe 1-2 pivots most, but for the most part, like steady tenure with a company. And then, for Gen Xers, that's a very different perspective because the world had changed so much in the sense of what it was like to be a Gen Xer in your 20s and 30s, given everything that you talked about, like politically, economically, socially, and just from the way in which American culture evolved and the speed by which things started to change. And I remember, 2007, 2008 being a pivotal marker for many women who had steady tenure with 1, maybe 2 companies. And then, your world is rocked. You go through this massive upheaval. You're either furloughed or laid off, right? And so many women reinvented, and men too, but, at Mayshad, we talk a lot about women because that's our ecosystem. Many women reinvented their careers and then launched something new. Or even if they did go back to the corporate sector and were rehired, you'd see tenures that instead of working with a company 10, 20 years, you're now working with a company maybe 2 years max, right? And so even, from the perspective of how you think about company loyalty changed so dramatically because now the company isn't necessarily taking care of you for life. You're now responsible for taking care of yourself. And do you think that was a part of how then what shaped Gen Xers' relationship to their own careers? Because it's a whole different mindset, right? A whole different realization in the sense of how you have to become self-responsible for your own destiny in a way.
Now, the reinventing is really happening with all the generations now. I mean, it's the boomers as well. It may be that they, were a little bit more secure than Gen X because they had been there longer and been higher up, but still happening. And so many boomer women have been reinventing themselves, and especially when they feel ageism is going to push them out, which is another thing. I mean, that's not the same thing as the economy, and it is so misguided and unwise because you really cannot judge people by a number. It's so unreal.
So Phyllis, you bring up a really interesting point because now, because of COVID in 2020 alone, I kind of stopped. Is it 55 million Americans that have filed for unemployment? Is it 58 million Americans that have filed for unemployment? Something in that range, right? And so, we know that women are overrepresented in every industry in that number. And so, how can, for those of us who are in a protected age class, who have been furloughed or laid off in the sense of reinventing and pivoting, but then many of us are actually leaders and, leaders in companies as well. What advice do you have for leaders to actually understand the value of what you just said in the sense of, misguided, often people are laid off because they make too much money, right? And often that's kind of code word for ageism, to be honest, right? And so as leaders now think through how can my company or how can my department or how can my team emerge successfully from this moment in time on because of COVID, what learning lessons should we take into consideration as it pertains to working across generations and ensuring that when we think about diversity in the workplace, we're also taking into consideration age?
Okay, I think that's a whole lot of questions. I was trying to follow it all. So I don't know if this is exactly what you were asking, but the studies show that there's much more creativity and productivity if you have diversity of all kinds. And I don't think that companies, not only companies and organizations, are focusing on age or generational diversity at all the way they are. You know, it's all about gender and race, ethnicity, and LGBTQ, a little bit about disability now. But most organizations don't have their affinity groups and ERGs around generations and age. And yet, when you really think about it, generational differences in attitudes really influence and inform how people's attitudes and behaviors are to all the other diversity factors. They just look at it differently. They've had different experiences. And if you're giving out the same messages to everyone, it's being received in different ways by generation and age. So that's one thing to consider, to not sort of sweep it aside. And I agree that the race issues that we're really happy to see, or some of them, you know, we are coming to the fore and really hoping that it's going to be dealt with in a much more meaningful way than it has been before. Or Me Too, you know, those were, you know, not pun intended exactly, sexier issues. And, you know, scandals were involved. And so they got a lot of attention. But we really need to think about the intersectionality of all of these things. And now, especially as you get into younger and younger generations, they are much more diverse. And they have all kinds of identities that they want to express. Again, I love that. But not everybody does, but it isn't being as recognized and making them feel as comfortable and belonging and including. And we need to be doing all of those things. So ageism is one of the things, and that's why I came up with this word. I make up words every once in a while. Collaborageism, which if you divide it apart, it's collaboration against ageism. And so I believe that we will never get rid of ageism, whether it's up, down, sideways, with the younger people feel it too, and they are very vocal about that. But unless the generations or people of different ages join together to fight it, it's not going to happen. And we're in such a time of divisiveness of all kinds that people are retreating to their tribes or afraid of what they're going to say. So that's making it even harder than it was. And with COVID and the kind of conditions we're navigating through now at work, you don't have the same kind of opportunities to develop relationships with people that are not like you or you don't know, even if they are like you. People are afraid to reach out. They're afraid of what they're going to say or how somebody is going to take it. And it's very hard to be spontaneous, which I think is a good thing. That's one thing that frustrates me about being in Zoom meetings. If everybody watches my little thing, I'm going, I'm thumbs up. But most people are just, sitting there. Not that they're not paying attention. It's not that they aren't, but if you were in the same room, there would be more of that energy and transmitting nonverbal cues and all kinds of other things. And you'd feel like much more a participant.
Phyllis, let's go to a second back to the Millennial Generation. And we know that it's, there was a period of time where everyone wanted access to the Millennial Generation, from marketers and brands to research institutes to employers. What do you think was so special about that moment in time for that generation? And number one, and then number two, now that there's more emphasis placed on Gen Z, let's talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between the two generations. And we're stereotyping, of course, and there are outliers and exceptions to everything, but just across the board. But so interested in your perspective of what was so unique about that moment in time that the millennial generation came to adulthood.
I don't know that it, every time is unique. But when the boomers came into the workplace and came into their adulthood, everything was focused on them. They were big generations, so sure, brands that we didn't necessarily call brands the way we call everything brands today at that time. Of course, there was going to be attention on them. And so the millennials were new. They seemed to be different than Gen X and the boomers. And in many ways they were. And in some ways not that different. And again, the older half of millennials are different than the younger half very much. And parents will say, my 28-year-old is so different than my 24-year-old or something, even in a few. We're going to have to shorten the time spans for generations anyway, because, I think even Gen Z will be only 10 years or something, whereas you still look at 20 or 16 or 20. So I think it's the newness, something new to understand, and that there are a lot of them. But it didn't make sense in terms of consumers or brands who were selling to consumers. Gen X had a lot more money and does than the millennials. It just seems a little crazy. There may be fewer of them, but they have more money to spend. So why were they ignored? Advertised doesn't make sense at all.
Do you think it was?
Oh, okay. Do you want me to?
Oh, no, I was going to say one tag on to that though. Do you think it was social media playing into that as well? Like in the height of, when Instagram, for example, first came on the scene, that was a platform that was highly embraced by the millennial generation. Whereas for Gen Xers, it was more about LinkedIn. Right. And so I'm wondering if there's a social media element to this in the sense of, the perceptions that we have of generations based upon what we see in social media.
Mm-hmm. Social media has touched everything. So yes, it's a big influence, positive and negative, as many things are as we progress, as is true of a lot of technology. Yeah. And see, it's not even Instagram. It is Instagram, but it's other things as well, but other social media. And that's another large generation that is very different from millennials, very different. And in some ways more like Gen X, who are their parents for the most part, but also very different from them in some ways.
Phyllis, from your perspective, given that this is 2020 and the year of COVID, let's hope it's just 1 year. Fingers crossed. What advice do you have to Gen Zs who are coming of age during this period of time, who are just thinking about, what does life at college look like when they can't actually fully participate in life at college as you and I would know it, or, for those that are, having to, secure their first job during this time period, or really wanting to embrace adulthood, but yet many are doing so from, their childhood bedrooms at home while they're online learning in their university settings. I would imagine this is going to be a very memorable moment in time for that generation in particular. And it's probably going to shape many different things, from choices that they have to, how they think about communication and how they think about their networks. And, in this time where, life would be very different for them had COVID not have happened to them.
Right. Well, I have to say, for one thing, the ones who are on the college campuses. We're hearing some very scary things. Besides, we know it's going to be difficult, and they're going to be missing a lot of the good things in the socialization, and having to go through taking all the time and all these other things, and testing and so forth. But gathering together in large groups and drinking and all of that sort of thing, and now causing so many cases on the college campuses, is only going to make things worse for them as well as everybody else. And, it's hard to say, just wait, put it off. But it may not happen if they're not paying attention to the rules. It's very difficult for the college administrators and staff, and difficult for the people who are in the dorms having to be policemen. I mean, it's very, very strange time for everyone. On the more positive side, just, I guess, to say, keep reaching out to making new friends of all ages, of people who are doing different things. And in terms of diversity, they're much better and more comfortable with people who are not like them, but not necessarily different ages and feeling like they use different media, they're comfortable with. I mean, everybody can learn to use what the other person wants to use. Learn to ask good questions. You're gonna, that is how you learn and grow. It's a very important thing. Build your curiosity muscle. And this is really true of all generations, but especially since they're starting from a point where they don't know a lot of people who are older than they are. Realize that one of the most important things is building networks, but diverse networks in all kinds of ways, including people of different occupations, and learn what, there are all kinds of things that people can do for careers in 3 years that don't exist now, 5 years that don't, you really don't know. And so the more you try out, college is always supposed to be a stage in life where you experiment in good things as well as lots of good things. But you get exposure to different people, different things that you wouldn't normally have if you were just home, or you went to work at that age and you were really focused on what you were doing in your immediate life. So, just try to be open and learn as much as you can.
Phyllis, I love what you said about the sense of curiosity, because, so much of now how we interact with other, and I've known you for a very long time, you've known me for a very long time, you're an extrovert, I'm an extrovert. And so I know that it's torturous for both of us not to be doing this conversation face to face. So, and I'm wondering, in the flat world under which we all kind of operate now, it does really change our sense of curiosity. And so in many ways, our worlds have become much smaller. Yet while technology can connect us to each other globally, but yet our worlds have become much smaller in the sense of we're not doing the same sort of networking we did just 6-7 months ago, right? And so, you're an expert networker. I've seen you in action. I love how you work the room. But now, to your point, is very different. And so I'm wondering, particularly for women, as we think about, the overused phrase, lean into the conversation, everything, Phyllis, that you're saying in the sense of, be around people who don't look like you, network with people outside of your industry, outside of your college, outside of your, your usual scope of how you live your day-to-day life. But now it's very different and maybe much harder to do that. Or are there opportunities for how we think about, expanding our horizons, even if we're expanding that from our living room? What advice do you have for us?
But it certainly is harder, and I think that people, especially the younger people, haven't developed some of the soft skills and knowing how to approach them or how to network. And I always thought it was funny about the phone thing when parents who were friends of mine would say their kid needed homework from a classmate, and they had to call up and were afraid that the parent would answer the phone if it wasn't just calling somebody's cell phone. They didn't know what to do. And so my friends or colleagues who were telling me this were coaching their kids about what to say when a parent answered the phone. So there are a lot of awkward, but we all have those things. It's not that hard. It's just that when you're used to everybody having a cell phone and only the person you're trying to get answering the phone, and so much time on screens. But I think another opportunity besides the direct networking with somebody or talking with people is, in terms of curiosity, is there's so much you can go online to learn. And then you may meet people when you're watching something that you start conversations with and discover that you have something in common, or you find them interesting because you don't have anything in common. So that it's a very much a matter of curiosity, openness, getting out of your comfort zone. And this comfort zone, is what I was saying before about parents being overprotective. And then kids are just thinking, well, I don't know, I don't have to learn what to do to fend for myself. I mean, self-sufficiency is a great asset. It really is a blessing. And that's something that has not been, there's just been too much fear. And it's not justified in a lot of cases. And there's some of the people who are the most overprotective live in neighborhoods where there's no crime. There's all kinds of things that they don't really have to worry about all that much. It's a mindset that we have to, I don't know how it's going to happen, but there are a lot of things that need reversing.
Phyllis, I wanted to talk about your work as an accomplished author, and you wrote a book called You Can't Google It. Talk to us about the inspiration for that.
Well, the inspiration was I wanted it as a vehicle at first. That's changed somewhat, but to be able to promote cross-generational conversation days, which I wanted to get into organizations all over. And so the subtitle of the book is The Compelling Case for Cross-Generational Conversation at Work. And I decided to interview 2 or 3 people in multi-generational teams in all kinds of industries and all of that. And so they were, about what would be the obstacles, what did they feel was so important, how is cross-generational conversation helping them, and all of this, and advice and stuff. And I decided to structure it around what I call 10 essential skills and traits that you cannot learn, acquire, or practice without conversations and relationship building. You can't just go out on the internet and learn these things or do these things. So it's such things as trust and empathy. Curiosity is one of them. Perspective, which is really important. And I am so happy that the younger generations are really interested in getting the perspective of older generations. Relevance, reciprocity, which, without reciprocity and curiosity, you can't be a good networker or business developer. So, personalization, and there are a few more of them. And to context, the problems, the solutions, and actions. So that's how it's all structured. And as it came out, and as those going around doing events in person, not all of them in person, but webinars and stuff, it became clear that those 10 skills and traits were things that people were not so much focused on because education had stopped focusing on a lot of those things. There are so many facts and data that are stuffed into people's heads because we have so much information that we can't handle, that a lot of those things were being either downplayed or not having enough time for them. And it turns out when you interview employers that that's what they're saying is missing with a lot of their employees. That's what they needed. You could teach somebody the factual stuff, but the other, which is, I think, misnamed soft skills, I call them performance skills, but they are harder, not soft. So I felt it was really important to focus on those things, talk about it in mentoring situations, in all kinds of situations that help networking and what's important for people's careers.
Phyllis, it's interesting because many of those words that you mentioned are now buzzwords in how we think about leadership during COVID. Honestly, so we hear a lot of leaders, a lot of companies talk about empathy and talk about resiliency and talk about flexibility and all the emotional intelligence skills. And I'm wondering, right now and going forward too, because we're living in a whole different world now, right? Where there's a blend of people in the workplace and at home. There's a blend of how people are managing their schedules to make sure they're taking care of everything they need to take care of under their own roof, but yet also being productive employees in the corporate citizenship perspective. So do you think this is a different time at which employers will have to come to terms with understanding that so much of the work that you've done is actually the most important thing now as it pertains to how do you build and sustain and motivate outstanding teams?
Well, I hope that they'll be focusing on those things, way beyond the intergenerational, multi-generational aspect of it, because they've become, there is no way of getting around it, aware of people's need to bring their whole self to work. That flexibility was going to be helpful to most people, not necessarily of any particular generation, but everybody, whatever was going on in their own lives. And you hear, in Zoom meetings and things that I've been participating in, I've heard people who were senior people saying how they loved seeing people's kids in the background and doing things while they were in meetings. Now, how long they're going to love that, but you can't get away from it. Things that they never had in their face before are definitely in their face. And so I think that even they, or even more senior people, are realizing own vulnerability in terms of these things. And everybody's got, older parents that they might have to deal with. They have all kinds of things. You can get sick at any age. Anybody can, certainly COVID now, but that's not the only thing we're getting sick about. And the mental stress that was true even before, it's just getting worse. The young people have more depression than anybody else, any other generation has been tracked before. And some of it is going over the line. Colleges are having to deal with this, and even younger than that. So, hopefully these changes are going to come. And yes, it's going to be costly. And with a bad economy, it's going to be very hard to spend money on things that they never had in their budgets before. But what do? I mean, you've got to have people as healthy as they can be to be productive. So wellness, I mean, there are all these positions now in organizations, director of wellness, director of, all these things. They have all of these names. I've done a few chapters in the Reinvention, which is my oldest book, that's focusing on wellness. And, they're talking about that because that's not an industry that paid a lot of attention to that. A lot of talk about that, and it's in my newest book that just came out last week, which is Embrace Gengagement, and that again is focused on law because the American Bar Association asked me to write a book on generation, but it goes into all kinds of things that people weren't talking about before because I like expressing what I think is important.
Phyllis, congratulations on your new book. That's really exciting. How do we stay in contact with you? How do we stay engaged with the work that you're doing?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a monthly newsletter. Sometimes it's more than monthly. Go to my website. You can't Google it.com. Without the apostrophe, you can't Google it. .com. There's a lot there. My blogs are there. And please sign up for the newsletter and for the offers on there. And I'd love to have you as a regular part of my community. And also, I love getting questions from people in any medium that you want. And if you have issues that are going on or stories that you want to share, I love stories, please get in touch with me.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. And we definitely need to stay connected, as you know we will, and have you back very soon, particularly as we think through, what will Q4 look like in this crazy moment in time. But then also, it's an election year too, so we have a lot to talk about. So much.
Well, yes, and say our prayers about it. We need to get back to a much more civil society that's focused on people and purpose.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm Jen Mercer-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to, again, subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out at joinmayshad.com. We'd love to have you come on board as we create a whole new world for women to network, connect, and do business together. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Have a great day.